With the Sea of Indolence out of the way, it's time to go just a little bit deeper. What's up friends, it's Livid here, back with a brand new Lost Ark video. Today we are diving in and breaking down everything that you need to know about the second underwater Abyssal Dungeon, Tranquil Karkosa. Now here's our disclaimer as usual. When it comes to dungeon guides, we believe that in order for you to be successful, we need to keep things simple and straightforward. The lead up to each major fight will only be talked about if there are challenging mechanics that need explanation. Otherwise, the focus will be simply on breaking down each boss's gimmicks, their respective movesets, and the core fight mechanics in order to help you be as successful as possible, and help with pickup groups via matchmaking. As with most encounters in the Gates of Paradise Abyssal Dungeons, you'll need to deal with the breath mechanic. Now if you need a refresher on that mechanic, simply check out our Sea of Indolence guide right near the beginning. Now Tranquil Karkosa is a huge jump in difficulty from the first Gates of Paradise dungeon. As an 8-man group, you'll need to contend with numerous cooperation mechanics, a couple one-shots, and numerous team wipe mechanics. All of this on top of the aforementioned breath mechanic. Now while battle items aren't always necessary to get through mechanics, if players are struggling here, we recommend bringing destruction bombs as your grenade of choice here, mainly for the very first encounter. Now we realize that every player is different in how they learn, so each part of this guide will be broken down into chapters down below, so feel free to jump around to the section that you specifically need. Now with that out of the way, let's jump into the first encounter. Kallivan of the Eroded Storm is the very first boss that you'll tackle in this Abyssal Dungeon, and I've seen this boss alone break up several pickup groups. This boss has a whole arsenal of large AoE attacks, making it difficult for players to remain in one location for too long. The boss also has one team wipe mechanic as his main gimmick, and that's where we'll start. The boss will summon two necromancers, one to his left side somewhere and one to his right side somewhere. Now at the start of the encounter, decide which party is left and which party is right. That respective necromancer will be your party's focus here. Now each necromancer will be surrounded in a shield, and while they're alive, they will prevent the boss from taking any sort of damage or being staggered. Now the only way to deplete the shields of the necromancers is through skills or items that deal weak point damage. Hence our emphasis on bringing destruction grenades. Once each group breaks their respective necromancer's shield, burn them down and regroup at the boss immediately. Now by this point, Kallivan will start channeling a team wipe mechanic, and a stagger bar will appear on the boss. Make sure you're using medium and high stagger damage skills to interrupt his attack. Again, you must have killed both necromancers in order to do anything to the boss at this stage. Once you've made it over this hurdle, it just comes down to knowing the boss's moveset, and like I mentioned, his AoEs are large and his damage is high, so let's break down his skills so you know what to look out for. Water Flares is a common ability that he will use often right off the rip. He will launch multiple flares of water high above himself, and shortly after, those flares will come back to the ground and blanket a huge portion of the map. These deal high damage and knock everyone up on impact. Another mechanic that comes out of nowhere and will likely catch players off guard is when pistols made of water appear in front of you. You'll see two beams of water start at a wide angle and focus after a short time into a central beam. As soon as these pistols appear, everyone needs to look toward the outer boundaries of the encounter area, as these will shoot a large burst of water forward, dealing moderate damage and knocking up any teammates directly in your path. Now if enough people do this and it hits one player, it can straight up kill that player, so pay attention when this happens. Kallivan can also leap away from the encounter, spawning a large yellow AoE that, if you remember, will deal high damage to both you and your oxygen meter. Shortly after that spawns, he will throw his anchor back to the ground and pull himself to it, generating a massive shockwave in front of him. Now you either get behind that AoE or far enough away from it when this happens. Additionally, at random moments, the boss will also mark the arena in red and blue tiles. When this happens, immediately look at the boss. If he's holding up his pistol in the air, everyone should move to a red tile. If he's holding his anchor up, get to a blue tile. Standing on the incorrect tile does moderate damage and stuns all players hit. Now last up, Kallivan will treat his anchor like a boomerang. He will spawn pillars directly in front and behind whatever direction he's facing. Shortly after, he will throw this anchor forward before it returns, traveling back through the boss and into the second set of pillars behind him. Now each pillar that is hit by the anchor will explode and emit a water jet perpendicular to the line of pillars that deal high damage and knock players up. As soon as you see these pillars form, move to the left and right side of the boss for safety. Now, as I've said, I've seen this boss end pickup groups right from the start, so we wanted to make sure this fight was explained in detail and clearly. Clear communication and timing on what party is tackling which necromancer is absolutely key. followed by effective destruction and stagger damage rotations to prevent the team wipe mechanic from happening. After that, it's just simply about avoiding his high damage AoEs while maintaining your oxygen meter. Now, on to the second boss. Now thankfully, the second encounter, Karkosa's Punisher, is much easier to deal with than the first boss, as there are no team wipe mechanics to deal with. The boss has very few attacks, but has a stagger check and summons that should be your priority, so let's touch on those gimmicks first. In regular intervals, the boss will summon a giant pufferfish that will work its way toward the boss. Focus and kill this enemy as fast as possible, as if it manages to reach the boss, the Punisher will unleash a high damage AoE attack all around the entire room. The pufferfish can also attack and deal knockup damage, so be sure to avoid its attacks in order to deal with it in time. The boss can also randomly grab a nearby player and begin walking away with them. Use stagger damage to interrupt the boss and free the grabbed player, or they will sustain high damage from the boss. In terms of general attacks, we have 5 major ones to touch on here. First up, the boss will stop and channel for a few seconds, showcasing a cross-shaped AoE telegraph on the floor that targets and follows either 3 or 4 specific players. Now after a short delay, these will pulse and deal moderate damage. Now if they're following you, watch them closely and dodge as soon as they stop moving. Just make sure to not move these AoEs on top of your teammates in the process. The boss will also periodically raise her arms up and lean back before plunging them into the ground, summoning vines and rooting all players in front of the boss. If a teammate gets rooted, simply auto-attack them to break them free. The Punisher can also slam one arm down into the ground, resulting in numerous high-pressure geysers of water to spawn, dealing moderate damage and knocking players into the air. It's common for the boss to also create a box of high-pressure water, keeping players trapped within this area during this time. The boss can also raise her hands up, almost looking like she's pressing against an invisible wall like a mime. This is your key to get behind her. After a short delay, she will damage and push all players backwards a significant distance. Now last up, 2 or 3 big blue circles will appear below random players. After a short delay, whales will erupt from these AoEs, dealing high damage and knocking players into the air. As soon as you see these circles, just get away from them entirely. Now this boss, as I mentioned, really isn't that difficult or complicated, and serves mainly as a stopgap between the first and third encounters. As long as you keep your teammates from being grabbed or rooted and deal with the pufferfish immediately, this fight should be a breeze. Time for the final boss, Karkosa Monarch Draikhan. And this one absolutely needs to have your team planning out their positions before entering the arena and understanding the boss's mechanics. Now there are debuff stacks to keep track of, as well as a wipe mechanic that occurs twice, each time having a unique pattern to follow. If even a single party member makes a mistake, this will punish the entire team. So obviously, let's start there. The debuff mechanic works like this. Now each head of the boss will either attack using a lightning or water-based damage. Now on hit, the player will get a debuff stack that directly correlates to that damage type. Each debuff can stack up to a max of 4 times, with each stack increasing the damage taken from those same elemental attacks. In addition to this, if you obtain a debuff stack of the opposite element, your character will unleash an AoE on the ground dealing damage to you and your teammates that is directly proportional to how many stacks you had. This means that you want to maintain being in either the lightning or water-based attacks, not both. Now at any time, keep an eye out around the edge of the battle arena for small floating orbs. Picking these up will reduce your stacks by 1. This means this whole fight comes down to staying out of the boss's attacks, and if hit, heading to the outer edges and picking up an orb to remove your debuff. Now for the wipe mechanic. At the 16th and 8th HP bars, the boss will rush to the center of the arena and begin channeling a team wipe in an AoE the shape of an octagon. 8 sides, 8 players. Prior to entering the arena, your party should arrange themselves in an octagon pattern. 1 person at the top, 1 at the bottom, and 3 on both the right and left sides. Now remember these positions, as you will go to them every single time this happens. Now from these 8 positions, lightning and water orbs will spawn. Now these will not change, but they will alternate elements per position. So if you get hit by the same element twice, you will take damage and get knocked back, opening up an avenue for an orb to make it past you. And if just 2 orbs reach the boss, your whole team wipes. To avoid this happening, players will simply move 1 spot clockwise after taking a hit from an orb in order to be in the position to get the alternate element each time. The first rotation, as I mentioned, occurs at 16 HP bars, and you'll simply move in the pattern 1, 2, 3, 4, essentially moving clockwise 1 spot after each orb. The second rotation happens at 8 HP bars and changes the rotation pattern. After the third orb is blocked, the orbs will shift elements, meaning you need to remain in the same location for the fourth orb before continuing your rotation to get hit by the final orb. So the pattern here should be 1, 2, 3, 3, 4. It's also important to note that on the second phase of this attack, an electrified ring will appear between where you typically stand and where the orbs spawn from. If you stand in this ring for even 1 to 2 seconds, you will die. Doing this all correctly will end the wipe mechanic and let you proceed with damaging the boss as normal. Now, because of the debuff mechanic here from the boss's attacks, we think highlighting the various attacks the boss can perform is especially useful here. The boss can spawn a large water orb on both sides, traveling slowly in a straight line towards the edge of the battle arena. And while traveling, they will fire streams of high-pressure water in periodic intervals that deal moderate damage and knocks players up in the air on hit. Now simply wait for these orbs to fire once, then dodge into where it just was to avoid this attack entirely. Now each head of the boss will also breathe the respective element towards the ground before rotating counterclockwise. Now if you move towards the location where the breath attack just passed, you will get a small window to deal uninterrupted damage to the boss without having to worry about any debuffs. The boss can also emit a series of 3 water waves around him, growing in size with each successive hit. Now when he starts to shuffle his feet before rearing up both heads, simply dodge a decent distance away before re-engaging. Lastly, the boss has a 2-wave lightning variant of this, but this time it's telegraphed by jumps. If you see him jump up, dodge away and wait out the second jump before re-engaging. This fight overall will put your team through their paces in understanding positions and when to rotate for the wipe mechanic. If players aren't also mindful of avoiding attacks, damage can quickly stack up from your teammates' elemental AoEs. If your group can overcome those 2 big obstacles, you should have no problem dealing with this final boss. Hopefully this guide helped you effectively tackle each encounter and boss that this dungeon had to throw at you. Anyways guys, you're now ready to tackle Tranquil Karkosa, and just one Abyssal Dungeon away from securing your final Tier 2 gear set. If you have any questions at all, be sure to leave us a comment in the section below. We've been having a blast making Lost Art content, and we love interacting with you all in the comments. We also invite you to join us on the Legacy Gaming Discord, with now over 30 guilds across our entire community and hundreds of people online every minute of every day. It's a great place to learn the ropes, meet new friends, and support the channel all in one fell swoop. Check out the link to our Discord below. My name is Livid, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on!